Did you shave this? No, you didn't.
Why?
Your face looks weird and you freshly shave.
Yeah, it does. That's kind of a strange shaped face.
I'm going to upset everyone someday and come in freshly shaved. Zero.
You're afraid to do it.
I'm going to do it.
You're too afraid. You'll never do it. This car looks strange.
I think you just look strange, you know.
Jesus Christ. Janie Mackers.
Janie Mackers.
Did your parents ever say that instead of saying Jesus Christ?
No.
Do you swear in front of the small man?
Yes.
Excessively.
This thing. Is this thing on? Is this thing on? There's no one here, is there?
There is, yeah. Brake strength just said, hey. Oh, the lads are all here now.
What?
They're filing in. It'd be great if you could like the live stream and then ask your questions. We'd really appreciate it as Owen fixes the mic stand.
I thought of a joke there, but I actually don't think you can make those jokes anymore.
Oh.
But hey.
Funny one.
It was funny at the time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, strangely, I don't. Is it anything to do with
horses, like, and hay?
No, you can't make that joke anymore.
Can't make that joke anymore. What a time we live in. Fucking woke propaganda, brother. Blue pill, black pilled brother. Manosphere.
What's the difference between the blue pill, black pill, red pill community?
Joe Rogan, brother. I don't have time to answer your fucking questions, brother.
So all the lads are saying, hey, brake strength, Eric, skate. Aaron's Basement says, have you seen that Mitch and Martins are going to split jerk the log press in the Arnold this weekend? I hope to God they do. It's the next generation of strongmen. More mobile, more athletic, able to put more weight overhead eventually because of it. I think at the moment we're seeing the kind of brute force and ignorance getting through a lot. And that probably won't change for the next few years. But I think definitely when you get a whole generation of strongmen who are using the split jerk more effectively or using the kind of Olympic style of pulling under or pressing under the barbell more effectively, then it's going to be much, much better.
The past receipt said, forgot my headphones at home, going ahead so I can listen to you. Don't stay in the gym. Don't mind us. You can watch this later, finish your session.
Go home and listen to this. I assumed he was at work.
Oh, sorry. I thought he said, I just assumed he's at the gym. Forgot my headphones at home, going ahead so I can listen to you. Oh, if you're at work, just go home.
If you're at work, just
go
leave.
Home. Yeah, just leave. Like, there's
Tell your boss we told you to leave. Eris says, sup.
Vardan said, Mukesh Ambani's son's wedding is here.
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure.
Do you know what that means?
Aaron's Basement said strongmen are doing Oli techniques now. Yeah.
It's great to see. Eric liked the live stream, and that would be so beneficial if everybody liked the live stream, because then it gets bumped onto a few more people's notifications or onto their home pages. Skate961 says, weightlifting 2.0 is 12 weeks and the RTA is 8 weeks. If I want to run them together, how would this work? I know you addressed your thoughts on running two programs before. So the best way to do it, we start week 1 and week 1 at the same time. Then for your last month of the last month of the weightlifting 2.0, you'll be free from that massive load of the RTA, but you'll have that inflated 1RM number for your squat hanging around for a while. So definitely start week 1 and week 1, and then it will taper off quite nicely.
Yeah. Good morning, Good American morning, lads, from Ends. Vardan said, go and check who the guests are.
Did you check?
No, I didn't.
I'll check there.
Jane on Ireland said, thoughts on the hunting season extension, lads? Very interesting question. It was much talk yesterday.
Yeah.
We just resigned ourselves to the end of the season, but then it opened up. But we weren't sure if it was till next year, but it seems everyone is saying that it's effective immediately. So I think, I suppose it's probably going to have the effect they want, but not as fast as they'll probably want it. And it's going to be not great, I think, to be honest, all around. But I suppose the outcome is what's desired, and that's less deer in the country. But it's going to be hard on those with a lot of pressure on them. And you can imagine what it's like going to be grodlicking those are they till April? Or is the Stags till
No,
April?
till the end of March.
Into March for
The-
those. So that's going to be.
The big problem is people don't shoot enough, and they don't shoot enough those. The people who aren't shooting enough those aren't going to shoot those now that you got it longer into the season. Like the background of the problem is recreational people not shooting enough animals because there's no incentive to shoot them. The incentive hasn't been changed. You've just allowed people a longer time frame within which to hunt. I'd say you'll probably get a lot more stags knocked now. Later into the season, we would have stopped shooting stags in December or the last day of December. And stags are the only thing that are financially beneficial for the more serious guys or commercial guys who shoot a lot. So I think it's just a kind of election move. Keep farmers happy, stay on the side of the IFA, and be seen to be doing something. But the real issue is nothing to do with the meat. That's the problem. That's why people aren't hunting.
Is your yours updating? Because your laptop is updating questions, but I'm not getting them on my phone, and I'm on all messages.
Let me see.
Top messages. Now I go to all messages.
Oh,
they're there now. That's so weird.
They're there now.
So annoying.
Thomas says just hit the 105 for a snatch pull to contact plus snatch. Previous PB was 101. With snatch pull or have helped, also hit 140 for a 5 kilo VB. So this is something that happens quite commonly where people will do better or have better technique where they've snatch pull plus snatch. They'll temporarily overtake their PR because of that. Usually that's technical errors, and the snatch pull beforehand corrects a couple of the technical errors. So common things you'd see is people's start position isn't great. Doing the snatch pull beforehand gets them to recruit a few more muscle fibers in that start position, get that extension a bit better, get their shoulders in a better position, their hips in a better position. The other thing doing a snatch pull plus snatch does is it stops people tearing the barbell off the floor in the first pull and allows them to practice that barbell coming back in towards them in the first pull. So it is pretty common. It's a kind of hallmark of technical errors in the snatch. So it should be a kind of flag for you as to, now I need to fix whatever the technical error is. Why can't I do it on the first rep, but I can do it on the second rep? It is pretty common, though, in kind of intermediate level lifters.
Break strength. Why aren't track cyclists studied more in terms of balancing strength and cardio? Maybe it's just me, but I feel like they strike the balance really well. So there is a host of research that comes out every month on different sports. There's loads of stuff coming in a variety of different sports. You just kind of have to go look for it. And there's more literature coming out now than ever across all areas of science. And science, it's actually a very, very good thing in some ways, but obviously for the individual interpretation of the results then is quite interesting. And one of the negatives of that then is you can get someone who really can find a study that says anything. People used to say that before, and it isn't necessarily true, and it wasn't necessarily true then, but it does. If you like, you kind of have this thing on Instagram now where, sorry, I'm on a bit of a rant, but you'll have this thing on Instagram where you'll have a slideshow and they'll just post references, and the mere presence of a reference does automatically give you more weight to what you're saying, even if those references often don't support them. And very frequently in the comments, you'll see something like, I read your reference and it doesn't support what you're saying, or your study isn't very good. But anyway, there's loads of studies on track cyclists. There's loads of studies, like if you look on judo, racquetball, volleyball, any sport you can think of, there is loads of people who've done studies on them. Very often, the ranking of the universities used to be done on number of publications, not so much on the quality of education you get, which, how do you even determine that, or job prospects? A big ranking on like the top 100 universities was how many publications do you get each year approved. That's one of the big weighty factors. And so in the terms of sports institutes and stuff like that, you will see a lot of kind of kiss me ass studies in some ways, not. But there is lots of studies on track cyclists. There's lots in swimming. There's lots in everything, really. There's a few on weightlifting. Now, not to disparage anyone, but recent weightlifting studies are no, I won't say they're not as useful as they used to be anyway.
So the reason they're not as useful as they used to be, and the reason you'll hear us talk about Soviet style or Soviet sports science literature being great and Soviet sports science era literature being great, is down to their cohort of athletes and the group of athletes. The reason modern weightlifting studies aren't great.
Actually, sorry, I want to interrupt you there. The studies we have access to
Yeah.
aren't always the best. So I know for a fact the Russians have loaded studies that they don't share with anyone. I know the Germans do some studies. I assume the Italians have, but we don't have access to a load of those great studies anymore.
So the reason those studies are so great is because they have access to athletes who can't say no. And the problem at the moment is that due to a host of factors, that most of the time you look at a powerlifting study or weightlifting study or study comparing soccer players to rugby players or rugby players to sprinters or sprinters to weightlifters. Those studies are being done on college grade recreational athletes who they're not the specimen of that sport or cohort or whatever. In Soviet times, you just don't have a choice. You just don't have a choice. In Soviet times, it was very, very simple. You were on the national system. Everybody was being studied all the time. There weren't ethics committees. There weren't things where you can say no to going into it, or maybe you don't adhere to the program because you don't want to adhere to the program, or maybe you don't take the supplements because you don't want to take the supplements, or a lot of the time in plyo studies or strength training studies, people just don't adhere to them, and you lose 50% of people over the course of 8 weeks, and then the study quality goes down massively. It's that the science is better than science has ever been. The method of studying is better than the method of studying has ever been. Our tools for measuring are way beyond anything they had back then. The problem is you don't have large groups of professional athletes who are the best in the world who can't say no to being studied. And that's the simple fact of it now. EWF have a sporting literature publication. The EWF fund lots of studies. Those Italian studies, the German studies, all those are funded by the EWF and they get published. But small groups of athletes who probably aren't pro, or else if they are pro athletes, are not being studied for a long time. And that's why that quality of literature has gone down slightly.
Anyway, there is lots of studies on Strax cyclist Cody P. So what was your metformin protocol for the 300 kilo squat? So to be honest with you, I would say I wouldn't really worry about metformin. It's not exactly super useful for performance enhancing. It's something like I got a script for and tried for a little bit of period of time. Like my hemoglobin A1C and fasting blood glucose are and always are very good, and I didn't really change those. It was just an interesting experiment. Metformin is an interesting drug. There's some very strong opinions on metformin, and a lot of people will tell you they have the answer to what metformin's use is. But again, it's like all drugs, it's a kind of a case-by-case basis in certain circumstances. But metformin is certainly an interesting one. You'll find people are very strongly against metformin, or you'll find people who are like, oh, it's actually super useful. But I wouldn't really read into it too much unless you've probably a particular reason or you've some good recommendation for that metformin. Elliot Hooker said, "Good day. I blew through the first accessories for RTA2, but struggling a bit with keeping upper back tightness while following the weeks of RTA. Will the following weeks of RTA help this, or should I add more weights or sets? But struggling a bit with keep upper back tightness." So Elliot, you probably might need to add a little bit of upper back work or extra upper back work. So I'm not sure what other program you're doing, Elliot. I can't think right now if I know, but you might need to just do something like extra rows, seal rows, dumbbell seal rows, 45-degree incline seal rows with dumbbells are fantastic. Horizontal cable machine rows are amazing. So I would start there with those and see if they adjust. Now, it depends how far into it. You might see a major benefit before the end of the program, but you could see a benefit. So I would say just start with some upper back work twice a week at the moment for 4 to 6 sets of 8 to 12 reps and try and progress them from there. TP said, are Olympic lifts necessary for judo? And the answer is no, but they can be quite helpful. But judo is quite an interesting sport because I think it's one of those sports where you can't really hide from poor S&C, or you will be found out, I think, probably more now than ever. So maybe back 100 years ago with judo, you could probably have gotten away with just daily body weight training and been fine, or lots of judo training. But if you look at a lot of the specimens in judo, they are doing some crazy throws. And if you look at someone like Shoshe Ono, he is amazing. And if you look at his S&C routine, it's fantastic, like super intense conditioning, really good weightlifting, really good squats, really heavy rows, loves all that rowing upper back stuff, and that's what I love about judo is, and it's like throwing, is you can't fake it, because skill development is obviously super high in judo, but at the same time, you need a lot of other attributes to be good at judo. So, if we're in soccer, you can play lots of soccer and you can get enough aerobic fitness from playing soccer due to the nature of the sport and due to the nature of how aerobic fitness is increased. And you can get a long way in playing soccer or football by being very highly skilled. But if you come to something like judo, you're just probably not going to be able to get away with a just at playing judo. So, in terms of the Olympic lifts, are they super necessary? And the answer is no. But heavy cleans or power cleans can be quite useful. I would prefer if you focused on, or not prefer, but I would suggest you focused on is full range of motion back squats, deadlifts, weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, strict pressing, and then lots of intense conditioning are all very, very useful. Lots of core work as well. And then if you feel like you've capacity and you've maxed out those, and you can add in some cleans if you want. So the problem with Olympic lifts, if you want to make them very useful for a sport like judo, is that you need to be getting pretty heavy with the weight you're using for the Olympic lift. So if you are 80 kilos, doing 80 kilo cleans is useful because relative to you, you're pretty weak, but you'd get a lot more out of just spending some time being able to squat 160 for a set of 10 or something high bar than you would from 80 kilo cleans. But if you're 80 kilos and you're doing judo and you can do 120 kilo power clean for reps, now we're talking like we've got big bucks. But I suppose the question there is then the only way you can get to 120 kilos for sets of 3 in the power clean at 80 kilos is by doing lots of power cleans. So it's really a resource judgment that you need to make at your current time in judo. And you need to decide, can I learn? Can I dedicate some time and energy? And a lot of time you might be able to, but a lot of times you can't, and I've a couple of judo people and we've had judo people and we just haven't done Olympic lifts. We've done stuff like squatting, high bar squats, deadlifting, loads of rows, pressing, chin ups, barbell step ups, all like that. And it's all very, very useful. One thing I would like to do is take a really high level judo athlete somewhere in terms of S&C. I'd really love to get my hands on someone, elite or average elite. I'd love to just see the difference because that's one particular thing we haven't had a chance to do. And I suppose I'd just like to test some things or just validate some thoughts which have been validated in other sports and with other people in judo. But I'd really like to get my hands on someone who does judo at like the Olympic level, to be honest, and just see if we could make a difference in a few months, which I think we could.
Kolmagarov says, "Hi lads, thanks for the live stream and happy weekend. Happy weekend to you as well. When I have the barbell overhead, I keep one wrist straight and one bent, and it's causing pain. Possible causes and how to fix. So the cause is a poor motor pattern. The initial cause of that might have been one wrist being tighter, one side of your front rack being more restricted. And then when it goes overhead, you kicked one wrist back and you didn't kick the other. Another thing might be you have a lack of external rotation in one shoulder, which caused that side to be further forward. And then you kick the wrist back as a kind of compensation method. No matter what it is, the fix is the same. The fix is just getting your wrist to be straight overhead. So you have to be strict with yourself on this. A lot of the time people have an issue like this or a fault like this, and they'll continue to do it over and over again, and they'll look at it overhead and they'll look at it in the videos and they'll ask questions like how to fix it. You do not allow yourself to do it. So if it happens every time you go from 100 kilos to 120 kilos, then you stop at 100 kilos every single time. If it starts when you put weight on the bar, then you never ever put weight on the bar until you fix it. Soft, limp, kicked back wrist at the top of the jerk or the snatch is absolutely terrible for overhead stability. You'll see a lot of elite athletes doing it. Elite athletes can do it and get away with it. For almost everyone else, and like in your case, you say it's causing pain, you have to stop doing it. Some strict pressing will definitely help. Just getting a bigger, stronger overhead press will help a lot. You can do some specific work, like some bottoms up kettlebell work. If it's those stabilizer muscles in your forearm, it's almost never that. It's almost always just a bad habit of kicking the wrist back to kind of push it into that behind the head position. So it is just a thing of having to be strict with yourself. It's like bending your arms in the clean.
You might take the next one.
Justman says updates on the release timeline of programs. Sika jump ? So 3 new programs came out today. The horse number 2, the conditioning for running, conditioning, rowing. So horse number 2, and this is so poignant to your next question. Sika jump horse number 2 has a lot of jump work in it, a lot of plyometrics, starting on a pretty fundamental basis, but going up to some quite advanced or intermediate level plyometrics by the end of the program. The program's a long block. It's 16 weeks long. It's the longest Sika program we have, purely for the fact of the amount of jumping and plyometrics that are in the program. So it takes you from kind of starting off just standard jumps, working on your landing mechanics, working on your jumping mechanics, and then brings you all the way through to some very, very focused power development work where jumping is the main tool we're using to get there. So Sika Jump is Horse 2.0, or it's part of Horse 2.0 for sure. There is no Sika Jump coming out in the near future anyway. We'll probably wait for at least 40 weeks.
40 weeks?
Until we get 2 runs through
Horse 2. No, it won't be 40 weeks.
A minimum 16 to 20 weeks until we get the data back on Horse 2.
I don't think so.
And see how people go with it.
Maybe. It depends on some other things. So there's
a lot of other programs to go up.
Yeah, so there's a front squat only program because it's a big thing. A lot of people run the RTA as this front squat program. It works well, but it could be done a lot better. We're going to do a low bar specific program because there's some things that could be specifically done better. We're going to do the super total program soonish. There's at some point the squat and the run program, and Sarah's happy with that. And then is there something else obviously missing? Oh, we want to do specific. It's like bodybuilding for weightlifting because it's a huge one. People ask a lot. And then there's a big project we're doing for athletes on the app, but we won't tell you about that yet because it's not ready.
I'd safely say if you want to do jumping on a program, Horse 2 is your nearest and dearest one for that. Thomas says, been weightlifting for 3+ years now. Should I start to use straps for the snatch? I know you've cautioned on this before. So the big question is why? Like, why would you use straps for the snatch? It gives you an inflated snatch 1RM. Definitely, it will give you that advantage. But there are the immediate pitfalls that we've mentioned numerous times. So most of the time people start using straps for their snatch, they become reliant on using those straps. Most people who are non-competitive weightlifters and just do a lot of weightlifting, you start to get them to snatch without straps once they've kind of turned over to the dark side, and their snatch pull under is absolutely atrocious without their straps on. So I would heavily recommend against doing it. If you're in a very, very voluminous stage of training, doing a lot of high volume hang complexes, high volume snatches at relatively insignificant weights, then by all means use your straps. But for most people, the straps are going to eventually make them a worse weightlifter. So I would just say you don't want to start smashing the bar more. You don't want to become worse at pulling under when you eventually have to pull under using just your hook grip. So unless there's a very specific reason, like an injury to a hand or something like that, where the straps are necessary, I would just stay away from them. There's no need to be using them, even though they do feel great. Eric says, Dara, will you reply to my email? I was just looking at your email before this, Eric, so we'll chat after this. Cian Murphy says, and I don't know, is this Cian Murphy who's Smurf? My buddy from Carrickline. If I've never performed clean stroke power cleans, would it still get benefit from them for BJJ? I assume this is you, Smurf. So you would. You still have to be doing all the other stuff. I know you were using a kind of semi-sumo deadlift style for a while. You'd actually get more benefit out of just conventional deadlifting than you would from going to power cleans right away. But definitely the movement of a power clean would be very beneficial for you, even just starting off by practicing it on any day when you're pulling from the floor. Just start with 5 or 10 minutes of power clean work with a very light barbell, even an empty barbell, just focusing on that, focusing on the speed, focusing on the positions, and going from there. Now, one thing that might be, I know pulling from the floor was a bit of an issue for you before, so just kind of high hang power cleans or mid hang power cleans are probably going to be more beneficial and have a lower barrier for entry for you.
Thomas said, cleaning 140 with 160 front squat. How much more could I clean before I need to focus on a front squat? So, Thomas, I'd say this is probably about the limit of where you really want to be in terms of efficiency. But the big thing in weightlifting is to always be focusing on your long-term gain. So not what can you do right now, but what do I need to squat to do my goal in the future? So let's assume the next goal is 150. What do you need to be able to squat to clean 160, or what should you be able to clean, or sorry, what should you be able to front squat to clean 150 reasonably? And the answer there then is something like 175 to 180. So you operate with trying to hit that before you hit those cleans. So you don't really want to be hitting your maximum capacity, maximizing that, and then progress your strength and always lagging behind on your strength or one or the other. Really, you want to be doing is kind of progressing both of those, or a head start even on your strength for most of the time. So I would say now is as far as you could get or would want to get. You could get more. I've known people who've cleaned their front squat. I know people who've cleaned 165 and clean and jerked it as their best front squat, but it is something you don't want to hedge your bets on. So I'd be looking at progressing your strength now and keep it going in the future. Patrick said, I got sick during Europeans this year and could not compete. How do pro athletes prevent that anyway to improve the immune system? So that's a very good question, Patrick. And it's unfortunately something you can absolutely mitigate and do things to work on, but it is a very real problem and it's not unique to you as an athlete. It's something that happens a lot. So things like cutting weight, compromising immune system, so lowering your calories, lowering of micronutrients, your training, exposure to your particular environment in jiu-jitsu is very egregious when it comes to being exposed to nasty infections. So getting so sick that you are so ill that you can't train is very, very unfortunate. So you have to just kind of look at a couple of things: quality of sleep, hydration, micronutrient status, and then have a particular supplement protocol that might help in that scenario. So we've heard for a long time when we were younger that vitamin C wasn't or was useful, and then people are like, no, it's not useful. But there does seem to be some evidence that vitamin C and vitamin D might be useful in any acute scenarios when getting sick. So starting at places like that. But it does come down to some individual things. And then there's other areas that you could look into that if you really wanted to, in terms of there is a lot of different drugs and specific peptides that we wouldn't be adept at telling you to use, but they are out there and we know people who use them in elite sport to prevent that sickness. So if you wanted to go down that route, you could talk to someone like Alex Keekel, Kikel, and it's just Alex Keekel on Instagram. You might have seen him on the podcast. So if it's a real concern, he told me this, he said he spends more time managing the immune system of BJJ athletes than some of his patients who are his clients who have HIV.
That's crazy.
He said because it's such the nature of the sport, you're training so hard, it's very hard on your immune system. A lot of times you're cutting weight, it's very hard on your immune system. The environment you're in, for whatever reason, when it comes to BJJ, on the particular thing, exposes you a lot. It's a tough sport. So, Patrick, it happens. It's not a problem you need to do. You're not, compromised or broken or anything like that. It's just, it is the nature of the game. And it's it's hard. The immune system is very intricate. It's very, very difficult to manage. It's super complex. It's heavily related to your metabolism and your genetics and a whole host of factors. So managing it is tough, and sometimes you need to deal with a case by case basis, and sometimes you can do some things to preempt it. But like, for example, I've gotten sick quite a bit over the last 2 months, and I would say before that I would have gotten sick no less than normal or no more than normal, or maybe even slightly less. And generally when I would have gotten sick, I would have gotten over things usually within a day. It's something I always noticed, like within like 24 hours most of the symptoms would be gone. However, since having a child, I've just been getting sick very consistently and sick for a lot longer, and there's some good reasons for that. And it's still quite hard to mitigate. So it is a very definite problem, and there's no clear answers. Certainly no clear answers that we could give you at the moment that would really make a difference other than hitting the big ones, which you're probably already doing, Patrick. You're probably already getting a lot of sleep. You're probably already having a nutrient-rich diet, micronutrients, and on
Eating your
top
veggies.
eating your veggies, and don't tell the carnivores that, but you're probably hitting, I'd have to guess, most of the big things. And then outside that, then you probably need some specific help. So it's very unfortunate, but it is the nature. And there's something about contact sports that just means that you get exposed a little bit more to those things.
Yeah, that's the thing. Elite athletes will get sick a bit less. Like, they're way more exposed because of the amount of training and because they tax their system. Or they'll get sick a little less because if anyone around them is sick, they'll just stay in a different house. If their partner is sick, they don't stay in the same bed. They just treat things very, very differently, and they don't expose themselves to the same kind of risk factors that general populations do. So it is, in those cases, you see it hundreds and hundreds of times where athletes will just move out. They'll go to someone else's house, go to a teammate's house, make sure they're in no way exposed. The problem with BJJ is people show up to training sick.
Oh my god!
The amount of times you'll be on the mats,
Oh
you'll
my
hear
god!
like,
I hate it.
Because some asshole couldn't stay at home from training for an extra night.
It drives me crazy.
Yeah, you're literally rubbing snots into each other's faces. So it's mental. It's the sport. It's the people who do the sport. You can't avoid that, particularly if you're prepping for Euros or something. You have to be rolling. You have to be training. So you can't not show up, or you can't take yourself out of those situations. But the people who are sick could choose not to show up, but they still do. I think Smurf is calling me Joffrey because I'm cleanly shaven, which I really don't appreciate.
Who's Joffrey?
Joffrey from Game of Thrones.
Oh, right.
Tewaze Tim says, Madden wa rinushle, August tu fain. Favorite snatch accessory, hardest CrossFit workout of all time. Do you want to pick the favorite snatch accessory and I'll say the hardest CrossFit workout of all time?
Favorite snatch accessory, probably low hang snatches. I think for most people could do it gets a lot of the markers.
I think the hardest CrossFit workouts of all time are the increasing calorie counts on things like air bikes, ski ergs, rowing machines, any of those like death by workouts where you have one of those in them. So maybe it's like 5 calories and 5 burpees, 6 calories, 6 burpees, 7 calories, 7 burpees. Those kind of workouts are disgusting, especially if there's an outlandish clock or time cap on it, like 40 minutes. Those workouts are the worst, I think.
DJ said thoughts on velocity-based training. So velocity-based training is quite interesting. Just reading a couple of studies there the other day, and they were comparing certain amounts of velocity loss in interventionist style studies in terms of looking at strength and hypertrophy. And they repeatedly, which is always a good sign for a study, is 3 or 4 studies across different years found the same thing when both looking for strength and hypertrophy, was that they saw no difference in outcome when it came to strength and hypertrophy when looking at a certain percentage of velocity loss. So it was like 15 or 20% or 20 and 40% velocity loss. They saw no differences in the outcome. So when it comes to strength, certainly when it comes to hypertrophy training, it's probably not in any way meaningfully useful. It's certainly not worth the investment in time. Probably when it comes to strength training, it is quite interesting in terms of like So what I like about that, I shouldn't have said that. What I find interesting about or vindictive about that is that RPE, in my opinion, is a poor man's velocity measuring. So you're going by, like, the coach isn't really, they'll listen to what you say, but they really look at how fast that moves. Or in reality, when people are using RPE, a lot of people are saying, oh, it looked how it moves, People like that looked like an RPE 9 or a 7 or something, even though it was a 1RM deadlift, So the RPE is like an inaccurate way of measuring velocity when it comes down to it. Now, it is obviously perceived effort, so you'd imply that how the lifter felt. But in regards to strength training, I don't think velocity-based training is very, very useful. Where I do think velocity-based training is useful or can be useful is when it comes to athletes in the in-season. So when we have athletes like sprinters, or we have judo people, or we've got rugby players or American football players, and we're trying to maintain a certain level of power output, and we're trying to make sure we don't cross a certain threshold of a too heavy weight. And an objective way of doing this is, if you have enough data when it comes to velocity based training, is if you know what your 90% speed is, and most of the time these are actually quite similar for a lot of people, but not always, and there is some individual differences. If you know what your 90% barbell speed is, and you know what your 80% barbell speed is, it's a good way of monitoring your fatigue that day. without having to taking out the objective analysis or the subjective analysis out of it, where you like, that didn't look that bad, or you go, that felt kind of slow, but then I look back in the video and it actually moved kind of fast, and coach said just get top heavy triples, so pretty fast. But if you have a good analysis of numbers, I think in that scenario it could be quite useful. So if you're like, okay, this should be moving at 0.8 meters per second in the top set of 3, and if you only get to 70% when it should be 80%, and then you get to 80%, you've already hit 0.5 and you're 70% for that day, then you're probably going too heavy. Then you have to make a good decision. So I think in the case of the athletes, it can be a useful indicator in terms of personal data, in terms of top loading. But that's primarily because you need to make sure that on the day of your training or whatever particular lift you're doing, you need to be maintaining a certain level of speed so you're not getting too heavy, which might fatigue you, which isn't great for the in-season athlete. It's not detrimental, but if you're doing it every week during the season, you're going to have a negative effect on your preceding sessions. And if it's a very important game or match or meet or whatever the following week, then it might be a detrimental impact on your performance. So in terms of analysis there, it can be quite useful. And then, of course, if you can move the same weight faster and you have an objective analysis, then you've gotten more powerful, or probably gotten more powerful, or your rate of force development has gotten better. So if, like with that Ryan Krauser, we had that 140 kilo hang power snatch, and he moved it at a faster speed than he did whenever before, then you've objectively gotten more powerful. So in that scenario, I think it can be quite useful. But when it comes to strength training, I think it's pretty much useless. And if your coach can't tell by looking, or if you aren't on the right track, then it's not going to really help you.
Do you know what I'd love a velocity meter for? Is just for, say, in your last 10 days, when you're peaked, and you're like, I don't know when I'm going to max out.
Yeah.
But I'm going to max out. And then you just walk into the gym, you do a little vertical jump a few times, and you're like, oh, that jump is 110%.
Yeah.
Whereas for the last 3 weeks, it's been 93%.
But
and then today is the day. But I don't think it really matters.
But you can just do those jumps, and you'll know, like, when you're super springy, and then when your hip is sore.
Unmec says, which variation do you prefer between pause and slow pull snatch? What are their uses? So I don't prefer either of them. I think the snatch is the best thing for the snatch. In terms of if I had to pick one of them, it's definitely not the pause snatch. The pause snatch is only really to be used very, very specifically. The interesting thing is, in terms of a slow pull snatch, we never really program slow pull snatches. But if we're there with somebody, or we're giving somebody video feedback, then sometimes the tempo of that snatch will change. So we will program pause snatches, snatch with a pause at the knee, snatch pull with a pause at the knee, whatever it is, just to get people to focus on certain positions. And most of the time, we're using a pause just below the knee because we want them to focus on sweeping the barbell back in their first pull. That's, of most people we give snatch feedback to, they're making that mistake, as well as a couple of other ones. But that's probably the most common mistake we see in the snatch. With the tempo, or the alteration of tempo, the slow first pull, most of the time that's a little band-aid, that's a little coaching kinesthetic feedback cue we use during the snatch itself. Get them to do it once or twice in session, then go back to their normal snatch. But it's not something we kind of use periodically, or we'd use for a block of training. Whereas the pausing at a certain point is, you'll actually see in one of the standalone snatch programs, we have snatch pulls with a pause. I think we might have some snatches with a pause as well in there for a couple of weeks, just to get people to focus on that. So not bringing the barbell forward or even straight up off the floor. Make sure the barbell is sweeping back off the floor and getting your knees back and out of the way. Patrick Louise, I probably butchered your name, Patrick. I'm sorry about that. Can you recommend any books on athletic training? I see a lot of ladder, stroke, cone drills, etc. being used, but would love to read more stuff about the topic, especially if there's evidence-based. So the best place to go for this is the UKSCA. The UKSCA actually have some really good books out there. I just looked on their website and I didn't see their general training manual, but they certainly had a general training manual in or being published for a period of time, so you might need to get it secondhand. Definitely most universities that have an exercise science curriculum will have those in their library. That's probably the place I'd start off with, because it will give you an idea of plyometric training, sprinting training, agility training. It will give you a quite high level view. And that's pretty much, like, it's Vershansky based. It's very much evidence based. And that's, unless you're going to the NSCA, their manual will be good as well. But to be honest, I prefer the UKSCA stuff. I think their stuff is a bit better. Yeah, that's where I'd go. It would give you the perfect kind of basis for that.
Anton Lopa said, working on sweeping the barbell back, especially into snatch, but hips are riding a little earlier in, and my back angle changes a bit in the first pull. Wasn't an issue before. Any tips? So, first of all, your back angle can change. So, that's one of the things that's a bit of a misnomer, is that people say your back angle has to be exactly like this, but we know that doesn't happen for a lot of lifters, and with good reason. So, as the barbell moves back, your shoulders move forward. So, the important thing to watch for is that your hips don't ever reach the line of your chest, or in some cases I've seen it happen where your hips are actually a little bit higher than your chest. So look for your shoulder angle and your chest, and if it's staying above, if your chest is still staying up above your hips, then you're fine. So your back angle can move like this as long as it's going upwards. But if you look something like this, if we're approaching that parallel with the floor, then you've gone too far. Simple remedy for this is just focus and keep your chest up while still focusing on sweeping the barbell back, and this generally corrects it. Usually when people start sweeping the barbell back, this is a common error, and it kind of rectifies itself once you get used to adjusting the issue. So it can change, your back angle can change somewhat. Just ensure that the degree of change isn't enormous, and just ensure that you're not ending up parallel to the floor. So do keep working on sweeping the barbell back, but just focusing on keeping your chest up is usually a simple way of fixing it.
Thomas says, I'm hitting 105, 140 as a 5'10", 102 kilo lifter. Are these good numbers? And what would class me as an advanced lifter? They're great numbers. Advanced lifting is probably, like, any term you're talking about advanced or elite level in athletics or any other sport, you're looking at world level. So competing internationally for your country, or just competing internationally on your own. And then elite. So elite level, step on from advanced would be with the possibility of medaling on the international stage. So in weightlifting, whether it's Europeans, Pan Ams, whatever it is probably to be advanced. So major international competition, and then elite level is some sort of chance of medaling or winning or podium at those. In weightlifting, it's super objective. Like, the numbers are the numbers. That's why people love it. I can do a 100 kilo snatch and compare it to your 100 kilo snatch, and it's very, very simple. We walk into any gym in the world and you have an idea for where somebody is. To be honest, I wouldn't be worried at all about whether you're advanced or intermediate or getting out of the beginner stages. It really doesn't matter. The thing that matters is you're becoming better every time you train. You're making better decisions every time you train or plan out a training block, and you're making progress. And I know that sounds kind of hippy-dippy about it, but the reality is weightlifting is an incredibly difficult sport. It's very simple. People with better genetics, born in certain countries that can get away with certain things, will always be better than everybody else. And that's just the unfortunate thing. Nobody takes up sprinting and just out of the blue expects to be great at sprinting. Everyone kind of understands there's a massive genetic component to it. There's a massive genetic component to weightlifting in the same way. And so don't worry. My main concern would be you could hit 80 kilo snatch and 100 kilos on a clean and jerk, and you could have trained your ass off, made very good decisions, really tried hard, be very adherent to training programs, and done everything you could have possibly done, and that's just all you can do. And so don't worry about it too much. I hate to give those kind of broad sweeping answers, but in terms of what's advanced or what's elite, most of the time in sport, we'd say advanced would be international level competition, and then elite is medaling or winning those internationals.
Kajkin says,
nailed it.
So I broke my right collarbone at 15, and I got a grade 4 AC separation a couple of years ago, now 32. Any hope of a successful pursuit of weightlifting, or is my overhead fucked? So it depends what you mean by successful. And sorry to give you a similar answer to what Dara just said there. But for you, a successful might be a bodyweight snatch, but successful for other people might be 1.5 times bodyweight snatch, which are drastically different. So it does kind of depend on what you mean successful. I certainly don't think you can be counted out. I certainly don't think you can just be like, oh, I can never do weightlifting. You just do obviously have to be super conscious that you did have an AC separation. I don't think the collarbone, unless it's set super weird, will actually have that much of an impact. Usually when you're that age, it's probably going to be totally fine or relatively benign in terms of your weightlifting. Now, The only thing would be the AC separation, but all of those things can be worked on very diligently. So it certainly won't be a super smooth process in the overhead position, but I don't think it counts you out fully. I think it really depends on what you're dealing with at the moment. So I don't think you should be too concerned. I think it's not impossible, you know, as long as you still have the. Will you fucking let me finish a sentence? Finish, I would say, do your best. Just try weightlifting, try your best with mobility, try your best with the rehab stuff, and it'll become apparent. Contact good people, try your best, and do that rehab diligently in soft tissue, and maybe, hopefully.
I did my AC joint on both shoulders and dislocated both shoulders probably more than 4 times on each side. The side I did my AC joint on last, the second last year I was playing rugby, became so much better because of all the rehab and all the physio I got on that side. So I would not be definitely with the AC joint stuff. You can absolutely rehab it. Now, as Garth said, if your collarbone's set weird, there might be some other stuff, but just go and try it. Ernest Kwok says, how do you program front squats in an Olympic weightlifting program with back squat and building strength as a focus? Thanks. So the first thing is the front squat is there as a kind of neuromuscular primer. It's there to practice the skill of front squatting. The back squat is how we'll drive pretty much all strength adaptation for weightlifters. That being said, never going crazy heavy or never going crazy high volume on the front squat is pretty much part of it. Sometimes people's front squats lag way behind. And this is a very, very rare case where they might get a front squat specific cycle. But in most cases, the front squats are in there in a similar way. Snatch pulls are in there. Clean pulls are in there. All of this work is in there to kind of ingrain that motor pattern and make somebody more skilled at front squatting. But in terms of building strength, the back squats are a tool for building strength. Generally speaking, we can get much more valuable volume in with the back squat. Also, the back squat won't beat us up in the same way and kind of tax our spinal column in the same way that a front squat will. And all that volume can be done at more meaningful weights, which is massively influential.
Beam, beam, beam. Don't read out that word.
What?
It's a Savar. So I replied to your comment last week, but the comment is deleted due to my hilarious use of the word. It's a reassignment surgery. Not that I don't care that he used it, but YouTube won't like it. Aries Douche said, lads, is brain drive nootropic factor related to learning new things or skills? And does it apply to physical skills as well, like technique? So brain drive and nootropic factor is very, very interesting. It's actually one of the interesting things you seem to see with sauna. It seems to be a release in it after sauna in some cases. So BDNF is very, very interesting. There's other ways of increasing it. But yes, it is very related to learning new skills, heavily related to brain plasticity. One of the things I was using last year with Alex was the tiger milk mushrooms, which he said kind of act as a mimetic for learning new skills. A couple of different things you can use, but short answer to your question is yes. Lots of reading you can do in it, but in terms of like effective stuff you can do, there's like lines you could cross and there's things you could use. So it kind of really depends on what direction you would go in that. There's people out there who provide you with protocols and nootropics and it's a very interesting topic, but I certainly wouldn't be giving a recommendation on anything. But yeah, it's very heavily related to brain plasticity and learning new skills and adapting to new things is related to BDNF. But like quantities and what you use and all that stuff are very interesting.
I feel the slope of the spectrum in nootropics is one of the steeper slopes out there.
Yeah.
With enhanced and non-enhanced athletes, there's a big wide spectrum and it's kind of all over the place. Whereas with nootropics, it's like better quality sleep and some stimulants and some small amounts of nootropics all the way through to massive quantities of brain-altering substances. Enz says, does leg strength play a role in keeping the bar in position during the front squat, or is it just upper back weakness? Would zombie squats fix that? Okay, so a couple of different things here. Leg strength or the lack of leg strength will pull you out of position in a front squat. So what we're talking about here is as you come up out of the bottom position, you'll see people's knees will shoot back and their ass will shoot up into the air. This is because their legs aren't strong enough and their posterior chain is taking over. Now, when that happens and the shins come back to being vertical and the hips come up higher, Then our torso is thrown forward. We're in an inclined position, and then more the weight comes forward, and we kind of lose that good front rack position. So having stronger legs allows me to keep my knees further forward, my hips a bit lower as I stand up, and I can keep that better back angle. So definitely stronger legs lead to better position with the back squat, the front squat, the zombie squat, whatever it is. Now, the next part of this is it just upper back weakness? And sometimes upper back weakness can be a contributing factor, but it's very, very rare that you'd have incredibly strong legs and a very, very weak upper back. It just doesn't tend to happen that way. You'll certainly get it sometimes where people have pretty weak legs and a very strong upper back, and they kind of make up for it. You'll see some of the powerlifters front squatting like that with the vertical shins, inclined forward torso, and their upper back can just kind of get through it and handle it. But it's rare we get very strong legs and not having a strong upper back. The final thing then is, would zombie squats fix it? Zombie squats are a movement constraint. So we're making the movement harder in some way or more difficult in some way. They're not going to fix it. They will push you down a certain movement pattern in the same way where having a box behind you that you sit down so you know you're hitting depth every time will push you to move in a certain direction. It is just a movement constraint. Like, the best thing to do here is to get stronger. The best thing to do here is get better ankle mobility. The best thing to do would be get your legs and quads specifically as strong as you could possibly get them. These zombie squats we don't really want to use a movement constraint in a long-term programming sense. The movement constraint is there to kind of correct the movement. But if the strength or the mobility isn't there to start off with, zombie squatting isn't the best way to do it.
Galaxy Hunter said, "Hi lads, you mentioned 120 after a year and 120, 150 after approximately 3 years as something of a strength standard. How would these vary with different body weights?" So, look, if you are on the extreme ends of one of the bell curves, or the bell curve in the bottom of the body weight, they're going to be a lot different. If you're forever 50 kilos as a male or 150 kilos, you're probably going to have a bit of a different results. Realistically, if you're 50 kilos, 120 is massive. So it's kind of the problem with, like, do those outlowers make it a spectrum, or, and I know I just said the word bell curve, but, or is it just something that's like not really applicable for, let's say, in this case, male lifters? So, like, if you're 150 kilos, you might just see a bit faster progress, but at a minimum, it's actually not even that different for super heavyweights. Like, if you do that after years of super heavyweight, then it's pretty solid. So the only person to really make a difference is if we're in that super light category, for 60 kilos or below, or 65 kilos below, and our body weight doesn't change after 3 years of lifting. So yeah, those alternatives are legitimate critiques of that maybe standard, but again, it is just a general recommendation. But ultimately, it does hold true for most people, because most people are in that 75, 80, 85, 90 kilo bracket. We don't see a lot of those people. You see very few amateur weightlifters who are super heavies, and it's for good reason.
Felix B says, how long do you think you could follow club weightlifting group program and make good progress? Should you ever supplement your specific situation stroke weakness? So the answer, first thing, how long can you follow it? You can follow it forever. Every national team, or most national teams in the world who have a training center, will have some sort of group programming. Most of the time, most athletes are following a pretty similar structure. Now, the caveat to that is that there is definite benefits to going and doing specific things for your specific case. Now, I think, to be honest, a lot of the time people are kind of snowflakey in terms of this, that I prefer this frequency, or I prefer this movement, or I prefer this standard, when in fact sticking with your coach might be a bit more beneficial. There is definitely an advantage to doing the same program as everybody else in terms of adhering to the program, in terms of forcing yourself to make progress, in terms of completing the program on time at the same point as everybody else, in terms of having competition with your teammates. All those things are great, and it's a great reason why training in a weightlifting club is so beneficial. With all of that being said, if you have a weak strict press and you can just do 20 minutes twice a week and fix that, then that is massively beneficial. In the same way where if you have injury rehab or injury prehab that you really should be doing, you should definitely be going and chasing that down. The reason I don't like people deviating immediately from the club program is that most of the time they deviate in the non-ideal direction. They'll say, I want a 200 kilo back squat, which is great. And you should want a 200 kilo back squat. But then they'll stop weightlifting completely because they're just back squatting. Or maybe they want a bench press, or maybe they're cutting weight, or whatever it is. So I would be hesitant with doing it. I will say you can make phenomenal progress for a very long time doing your club weightlifting program. And this is coming from person who owns a company that sells weightlifting programs. It's more beneficial for me to tell you you need to change programs straight away. But you can make very, very good progress on group training plans. And just be cautious when you do deviate. Make sure you're deviating in the correct direction and not necessarily taking one step forward and two steps back.
Okay, we need to pick a few.
I'm going to pick one of Dave Gunderson's questions because he asked a few of them and said, pick one of my questions, please. So I appreciate that. I appreciate not wanting to take too much time. So Dave Gunderson asks, what is the best percentage of a 1RM to train at for strength? And the answer is all of them. The best way to train for strength is to move through a quite voluminous period of training at the start. So starting probably around 50 to 60% of 1RM and doing a lot of volume and accruing a lot of volume there. Then going to an intermediate amount of volume. So this is down to your 6s, your 5s, your 4s. You're dropping the volume slowly and then increasing that 1RM percentage. This is going to 70, 75, 80% of 1RM. And then going down to that super low amount of volume. So your 6 or 5 sets of triples, doubles, and singles, and then doing those at 90% and above. So the answer is you have to train across all of them. You have to accrue a lot of high volume work. Then you have to accrue a lot of medium volume work. Then you have to accrue a lot of very, very low volume work when you peak towards the end of a program. There's no kind of one percentage. It's not 5x5 at 75%. And a lot of people want that kind of cookie cutter answer, but that's not the best way. You will get a bit stronger and it will work for quite a while, but the best way is to train across all those percentages for a certain period of your months or years or macro cycle or meso cycle or whatever it is. And that is the best way of getting
Microcycle.
Microcycle.
David Tula said, just saw an app updating Horse 2, but about senior seeking conditioning now, so you might have already talked about it, but can you give an overview on who these are for?
We didn't give an overview of the conditioning. We did give an overview of the Horse 2, and that's back. We'll put timestamps up when this video goes up, but we'll give a rough overview of all of them. So conditioning programs, there's 2 of them up currently. There will be a HIT program going up in the next few weeks. We just have to change some of the user interface to allow people to use the HIT programs. So the 2 conditioning programs there at the moment are named erg rowing and they're named track running. For the rowing erg, you can use any machine. Most of the time we'll see Concept 2 machines being used, but you can use any rowing machine that enables you to have an instant 500-meter split time. So 500-meter split, as long as you can get that up on the screen, that's perfect. You can use that rowing machine. Most rowing machines will use that as the standard pacing. Now, the time you need or the kind of test you need for your rowing is you need a 500-meter row time. Super simple. Just go to the gym, warm up, do a few 200s, do a few 150s or whatever you want to do. And then you test your 500-meter row time. You input that the same way you input your 1RM for your squat, your deadlift, whatever it is. And then it will give you 8 weeks of programming, 2 sessions per week on the erg. This is the lowest barrier for entry. It is the perfect starting point, particularly for strength training athletes and power training athletes who mightn't have done a lot of aerobic conditioning in the past. It takes that into account. The second program is called track running, but to be honest, it can be done anywhere where you have around 400 meters to work with. So the outside diameter of most playing pitches is 400 meters. The running track at your local athletics place is 400 meters. Even if you just have a section of road that's 200 meters long, you can run out and run back. What this is it's an interval running training program. So it's multiple running intervals, flat pace across those intervals for most of the sessions. So you're showing up and you might be doing 1K repeats, 800-meter repeats, 200-meter repeats, 100-meter repeats. And basically you're accruing an aerobic base through the medium of running. It does start off at a very basic level. So it asks you for a 1 kilometer time. Same way, you have to go and test your 1K time unless you know it. You might know 2 months ago I ran a 1K, or maybe I was doing a 5K and I know I can run roughly this pace. You input that time at the start. it will then give you the times for your 200-meter runs, your 400-meter runs, your 800-meter runs, or so on. Both of these programs are specifically written to enhance your aerobic base. So the running program, a track running program, is not an athletics program. It's not written for only track and field athletes to run. It's written for general strength training athletes and all other athletes so they can go and use it. The horse program then is the next iteration from the original horse program. So it's a very big focus on power and speed, strength, and hypertrophy. The power and speed work in this one, we have a lot of plyometrics. You're doing jumps twice a week. You're doing a lot of that kind of fundamental building of jumping kind of prowess or gaining those skills you need to have much better jumps through all the way at the end to doing some drop jumps and some much, much bigger jumps. In terms of the power work, we have behind the neck power jerks, behind the neck push presses, and this is kind of one of the main streams of focus for the horse too, is that big overhead behind the neck work. So slightly wider than normal grip, which will suit a lot of us who might have tight shoulders, especially if you're doing a lot of benching or you're doing BJJ or something like that. The behind the neck work is actually a bit easier. You can set the bar in your shoulders to have a slightly wider than normal grip and have a nice overhead position then because of it. So it's very, very heavily focused on that. Obviously, there's big squats in it. Obviously, there's a lot of upper body hypertrophy work in it. And it is very much along the same lines as Horse 1, but a bigger focus on that kind of power element of it.
NMC said finishing the squat and deadlift or the deadlift and bench program next 2 weeks coming to exam season, so one of the same resources. What program do you have? But you go for same things to give training a go. You could do something like run the off-season program, but you could do it 2 days per week. So you do a week over the course of 2 weeks. So you do day 1, day 2, 1 week. The next week, day 2, do day 3 and day 4 on week 2 as a means of spreading out the program. But it would be fairly low intensity in terms of mental capacity, and it's just general movement capacity and hypertrophy work. So that would probably be the best bet there. I think this is one more. Let's make sure there's no more app questions before we go. Man's art group said completed Horse 1 yesterday. Mans, did you let us know how the numbers went? Could you actually email us, please? And thank you. If you have a minute. Loaded Horse 2 today. The gallop grows stronger.
Mentally says, just saw the rowing erg program is up. Can this be modified for ski erg or bike erg? So we've had 2 athletes use it for ski erg. It can be done. You're going to need some auto regulation in there, depending on how effectively you can use that ski erg. So ski ergs are very, very difficult. Some athletes, particularly some of the bigger, heavier CrossFit athletes, are phenomenal on the ski erg. They just have a lot of ability to produce power with their upper body, particularly heavier upper bodies, because they can put a lot of downward force into it. So you can definitely use it. If you are doing it, you might just get in touch with us and we'll keep in touch with you over the course of the 8 weeks just to see how you're getting on, making sure everything is tipping away nice and well. In terms of the bike erg work, so we actually have a bike erg program coming very, very soon. You could certainly do it. You can use 500-meter pace time. By all means, you can do it, but there will be a bike program up there very, very soon.
Okay, I think that's all we got time for today. Thanks for everyone for watching. Greatly appreciate your questions. Check out the Seek Strength app on iOS and Android. And all your training needs now, including your conditioning, as Ara just went over.
Woo! Thanks, guys.